The case for women-only spaces. Before we begin this discussion, I want to make a categorical, undeniable, and foundational statement. This talk is not claiming that all men who claim to be women are violent sexual predators who pose a threat to biological women. It is absolutely crucial to state that many individuals who identify as transgender live peaceful, law-abiding lives and face genuine hardships of their own. However, public policy, safeguarding, and the protection of vulnerable groups cannot be built on the assumption that everyone acts in good faith. Law and policy must be designed to protect the vulnerable from those few who seek to do them harm. Today, we are looking directly at the reality that biological women are entirely right and justified to believe that biological safe spaces, such as toilets, changing rooms, domestic violence shelters, and prison wings, are necessary. They are right to believe that they could be at risk of sexual violence or assault if men who claim to be transgender women are allowed to occupy such private, enclosed places. This is not a theoretical fear born of prejudice. It is a highly rational fear grounded in biology, statistics, and a devastating trail of documented global case studies. To understand the depth of this issue, we must first look at the hard, empirical data. We must step away from political slogans and look at what governments and justice systems are actually recording. Let us examine the statistics from the United Kingdom, specifically the data released by the Ministry of Justice regarding inmates convicted of sexual offences. According to the official United Kingdom Ministry of Justice statistics collected in March and April of 2019, the figures are deeply concerning and illuminating. This Freedom of Information data provided the first official comparison of the rate of sex offending across three distinct groups: biological men, biological women, and male-born prisoners identifying as transgender. The data showed that out of 129 male-born prisoners identifying as transgender, a staggering 76 individuals had at least one conviction for a sexual offence. For those utilising audio, let me be explicitly clear about what that means mathematically. 58.9% of the transgender female prison population in that census were convicted sex offenders. Let us compare that to the baseline populations during that exact same time period. Out of 78,781 biological men in prison, 16.8% were convicted sex offenders. Out of 3,812 biological women in prison, just 3.3% were convicted sex offenders. The statistics show us that male-born individuals identifying as women do not adopt the incredibly low offending patterns of biological women. Instead, they exhibit a rate of sexual offending that drastically exceeds the general male prison population. Furthermore, a detailed breakdown of these 76 transgender offenders reveals that these are undeniably male pattern crimes. The convictions included 40 counts of rape and 10 counts of attempted rape. Under United Kingdom law, the crime of rape is legally defined as penetration with a penis, making it a crime that requires male biology. Behind these cold statistics are the harrowing stories of real women who were forced to endure trauma because their right to a safe, single-sex space was dismantled by institutional policies. Consider the infamous case of Karen White in the United Kingdom. Karen White was born male and had an extensive criminal history prior to 2017, including convictions for indecent assault, indecent exposure, gross indecency involving children, violence, and dishonesty. Despite this undeniable history of male-pattern sexual and physical predation, White claimed to identify as a transgender woman. Operating under inclusive placement policies, the state remanded White to His Majesty's Prison New Hall, a women's prison in West Yorkshire, housing vulnerable female inmates. The result was an entirely preventable tragedy. While imprisoned in the female estate, White launched what inmates described as a reign of terror, with multiple complaints of sexual assault made within a mere 3-month period. The assaults were brazen and deeply traumatizing. In one documented instance, White pressed an erect penis against the back of another female inmate while they were queuing for medication. In another instance, White grabbed a woman's hand and forced it against a breast prosthesis. White was eventually moved to a men's prison and pleaded guilty to 2 historical counts of rape committed prior to imprisonment, 1 count of wounding, and the 2 sexual assaults committed against the women inside the prison. During the trial, the prosecutor stated that White used a transgender persona specifically to put himself in contact with vulnerable victims. The sentencing judge, Christopher Batty, sentenced White to life in prison, explicitly calling White a predator who was highly manipulative and represented a significant risk of serious harm to children, to women, and to the general public. Moving to Scotland, we find the chilling and politically seismic case of Isla Bryson. Bryson, a biological male formerly known as Adam Graham, raped 2 women, one in 2016 and another in 2019. Prosecutors described how Bryson preyed on vulnerable women after meeting them online. Bryson only began to claim a female identity and transition after the rape charges were brought. Despite being convicted of 2 counts of rape against women, the Scottish Prison Service initially remanded Bryson to Cornton Vale, an all-female prison. This sparked immense national and international outrage. Politicians, women's rights campaigners, and even a United Nations Special Rapporteur expressed grave concerns over the physical and psychological danger of placing a convicted double rapist into a sanctuary for women, many of whom are survivors of male violence. The backlash was so intense that the First Minister of Scotland was forced to personally intervene to have Bryson removed to a male facility. The trial judge, Lord Scott, later noted that Bryson showed a total lack of remorse, baselessly claiming the 2 female victims had colluded, and told Bryson, "You see yourself as the victim in this case, but you are not." In England, another case highlights the dangers of deception and the violation of consent. In 2022, Kiara Watkin, a 21-year-old transgender woman, engaged in sexual activity with a male victim without disclosing her biological sex. During the encounter, Watkin explicitly lied to the victim, claiming to be on her period to prevent the victim from touching her below the waist, thereby intentionally concealing her intact male genitalia. The Crown Prosecution Service successfully convicted Watkin of sexual assault, arguing that by failing to disclose her biological reality, Watkin deprived the victim of the ability to give informed consent, causing a significant impact on the victim's mental well-being. This crisis of safety is not confined to the British Isles. It is a global phenomenon. Let us broaden our view to the most infamous transgender-identifying convicted rapists from all over the world, demonstrating the horrific consequences of removing women's safe spaces. In Canada, there is the deeply disturbing case of Christopher Hambrook. Hambrook, a biological male, claimed to be a transgender woman named Jessica. Exploiting progressive self-identification policies, Hambrook gained access to 2 separate women's shelters in Toronto and Vancouver. These shelters are the absolute last line of defence for women. They are spaces designed specifically for women fleeing domestic violence and homelessness. Inside these male-free spaces, Hambrook sexually assaulted and raped vulnerable women, including a deaf woman. Psychiatric evaluations conducted during the legal proceedings concluded that Hambrook was not genuinely transgender, but rather a predatory male who lied about receiving hormone treatments specifically to bypass the security protocols of female-only spaces. The judge in the case noted that Hambrook's conduct inflicted severe psychological damage on women who thought they had finally found a safe haven. In the United States, we see the exact same pattern of institutional failure. At the Rikers Island jail complex in New York, a biological male identifying as a woman named Ramel Blount, also known as Diamond Blount, was placed in the Rose M. Singer Women's Facility. In February of 2021, a 33-year-old female inmate had just finished showering in the facility's bathroom. Blount approached the woman from behind, pushed her down by applying pressure to the back of her neck, and raped her. Blount pleaded guilty to attempted rape, was sentenced to 7 years in prison, and was forced to register as a sex offender. In New Jersey, the state's policy of housing transgender women in the Edna Mahan Correctional Facility for Women resulted in an inmate, Demi Minor, impregnating 2 different female inmates. Minor, a biological male, was serving a 30-year sentence for manslaughter. While the prison department attempted to call the encounters consensual, the Federal Prison Rape Elimination Act legally defines all sexual contact between inmates as misconduct due to the inherent power imbalances of incarceration. The scandal forced the New Jersey Department of Corrections to quietly roll back its policy, implementing a rule that allows officials to consider reproductive considerations to prevent biological males from being housed with biological females. In Illinois, a transgender inmate named Janiah Monroe, a biological male who still possessed male genitalia, was transferred from a male prison to the Logan Correctional Center, a women's prison. In a federal lawsuit, a female inmate known as Jane Doe alleged that she was raped by Monroe. Furthermore, the lawsuit alleged that prison officials conducted a sham investigation, coercing the female victim into denying the attack took place so they could falsely classify it as consensual and protect the state's contentious transgender transfer policy. We also see this threat manifesting in public schools. In Loudoun County, Virginia, a 14-year-old male student claiming a female identity and wearing a skirt was allowed access to the girls' bathroom at Stonebridge High School. Inside that bathroom, the biological male overpowered a 15-year-old girl, put her on the ground in a handicap stall, and subjected her to a violent, non-consensual sexual assault. The local school board initially attempted to cover up the incident, leading to massive national outrage. The perpetrator, Hunter Heckle, was subsequently found guilty of sexually assaulting another girl at a completely different high school. In Ireland, the penal system was thrown into chaos by the case of Barbie Kardashian. Born male under the name Gabrielle Alejandro Gentile, Kardashian legally changed gender and was placed in the women's section of Limerick Prison. Kardashian was sentenced to 4.5 years for making horrific, premeditated threats to rape, torture, and murder her mother and a female social worker. Kardashian's history of violence against women was extreme. In one instance, Kardashian ripped the eyelid off a female social worker, later describing the woman's screams of agony as music to my ears. Despite posing a profound, undeniable threat to biological women, the acquisition of a legal gender recognition certificate meant that the state forced female inmates and female prison guards to share space with this violent offender. Also in Ireland, a transgender woman named Shauna Kavanagh, possessing a gender recognition certificate and 15 previous convictions for assault and public order offences, was placed in the Dockers Centre, a female prison. Kavanagh was convicted of an unprovoked brutal assault on a homeless woman in a Dublin shelter, where Kavanagh sat on top of the victim and repeatedly punched her with a closed fist, pulling clumps of hair from the terrified woman's head. In New Zealand, the courts dealt with Maxine Green, a transgender woman convicted of 5 charges of sexual offending against 3 children over a 10-year period between 2006 and 2016. The horrific abuse occurred prior to Green's transition. This case underscores a vital criminological point. The predatory sexual behaviour is often established while the offender is living as a male, and the subsequent change in gender identity does not erase the deeply ingrained history of male pattern violence. Now, critics of this perspective often attempt to isolate these incidents. They argue that a prison is not a bathroom, and a bathroom is not a changing room. They argue that we cannot dictate public civil policy based on the extreme environments of the carceral system. But I ask you to reason through this argument carefully. It matters not whether the assault took place in a biological women-only toilet, a high school locker room, a domestic violence shelter, or a female prison wing. The geographical location is entirely secondary to the underlying mechanism of the threat. What matters fundamentally is the potential for assault created by removing the boundary of a safe space. Why do women's safe spaces exist in the first place? They exist as a direct, universally understood response to the biological reality of sexual dimorphism and the statistical reality of male pattern violence. Males commit the vast, overwhelming majority of violent and sexual offences globally because of differences in upper body strength, bone density, and muscle mass. Biological women are physically vulnerable to biological men. Safe spaces are therefore constructed in areas of heightened vulnerability. We create them where women are sleeping, such as in shelters and prison cells. We create them where women are undressing. such as in changing rooms and locker rooms. We create them where women are attending to intimate bodily functions, such as in toilets and bathrooms. The door to a women's locker room or a women's shelter is not just a piece of wood. It is a social and physical boundary that tells society, no biological males may cross this line. When you introduce a policy of self-identification, you destroy that boundary. If any male can enter a female space simply by declaring a female identity, or by wearing a skirt, or by changing a legal document, then the space ceases to be female only. It becomes a mixed-sex space. And as the harrowing cases of Christopher Hambrook in a Canadian shelter, Ramel Blount in a New York jail shower, and Hunter Heckle in a Virginia school bathroom demonstrate, predatory men will actively utilize the removal of these boundaries to access victims. To say that biological women are bigoted or irrational for fearing the presence of biologically intact males in their private spaces is a profound gaslighting of the female experience. Women have spent centuries fighting for the right to public accommodation that respects their physical safety and their dignity. When a biological woman enters a changing room, she expects to be shielded from the male gaze and male physical presence. When she enters a shelter fleeing a violent husband, she expects to be shielded from male bodies. When she is incarcerated, she expects the state to uphold its duty of care and protect her from male inmates. To force women to share these intimate, vulnerable spaces with biological males who possess male genitalia and male physical advantages is to inflict psychological distress and physical danger upon them. It does not matter if the biological male identifies earnestly as a woman, or if they are a predator wearing a disguise. The woman in the room has no way of knowing their internal psychology. All she knows is that a biological male is present in a space where she is undressed, asleep, or trapped. Let me reiterate my opening point. This is not an indictment of every transgender person. The vast majority of transgender individuals are not a threat to anyone. But policies cannot be based on the best-case scenario. When we build a bank vault, we do not leave the door wide open just because most people are not bank robbers. We lock the door to keep the robbers out. When we create a biological women-only space, we must maintain the biological boundary to keep predators out. The statistics from the United Kingdom prove that male pattern sexual violence does not disappear when a male adopts a female identity. The stories from Scotland, Ireland, Canada, the United States and New Zealand prove that when authorities prioritise gender identity over biological reality, it is invariably biological women who suffer the horrific consequences of sexual assault, rape and trauma. Biological women are entirely right to defend their safe spaces. They are right to demand that the law recognises biological reality. And society is morally obligated to listen to them, to protect them, and to ensure that the boundaries that keep them safe are never compromised. Thank you. Footnote: please look to description for citations and references involved within this talk.